The transport ship Meridian's Edge hummed through the void between star systems, carrying its mixed crew of humans and aliens toward what everyone hoped would be a peaceful first contact mission. Among the diplomatic team sat Elena Vasquez, a small woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun and eyes that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing, while the other humans chatted nervously about the upcoming meeting with the Cathari Empire. Elena remained silent in her corner seat, methodically checking and rechecking her equipment. Her fellow diplomats had learned not to mistake her quietness for weakness or disinterest. Elena simply preferred action over words, observation over conversation. The Cathari were a proud warrior race, standing nearly 8 feet tall with chitinous armor-like skin and 4 powerful arms. Their empire stretched across 12 star systems, and they had never before agreed to meet with what they considered lesser species. The fact that they had agreed to this meeting at all was considered a diplomatic miracle. Commander Torres, the mission leader, approached Elena's seat. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. Elena looked up from the tactical scanner she was calibrating. "Should I be?" Her voice was soft, almost musical, but there was steel underneath. "The Cathari have a reputation," Torres said carefully. "They respect strength above all else. Some of the team are worried that our diplomatic approach might be seen as weakness." Elena nodded once and returned to her equipment. Torres waited for more, but Elena had already said everything she felt needed saying. He had worked with her for 3 years and knew better than to push for unnecessary conversation. The truth was, Elena had studied every available record of Cathari culture. She knew they valued honor, courage, and direct action. She also knew that their previous encounters with other species had ended in either subjugation or destruction of those they deemed weak. The human delegation carried the hopes of Earth's colonies on their shoulders. As the ship entered the Cathari home system, alerts began blaring throughout the corridors. Elena was on her feet before the first announcement finished echoing through the speakers. "All hands to stations. We are detecting multiple unidentified vessels approaching our position." The diplomatic team rushed to the bridge, where Captain Morrison was studying the tactical display with growing concern. 6 massive Cathari warships had materialized around the Meridian's Edge, their weapon systems powered but not yet targeting. "Captain," came a voice through the communications array. "This is War Commander Thakvan of the Imperial Fleet. You will submit to immediate boarding and inspection. Any resistance will be met with destruction." Captain Morrison looked to Commander Torres, who nodded grimly. They had expected this possibility. The Cathari would want to demonstrate their dominance from the very beginning. "Acknowledged, War Commander," Morrison replied. "We submit to inspection and await your boarding party." Elena watched the exchange with calm eyes, her hand resting lightly on the grip of her sidearm. Unlike the others, she showed no signs of tension or fear. She had faced hostile situations before, and she knew that panic was more dangerous than any external threat. The docking bay filled with the heavy footsteps of Cathari warriors as they boarded the human vessel. 12 towering figures in ornate armor strode through the corridors, their forearms carrying various weapons and scanning devices. Their leader, identifiable by the golden trim on his armor, stood nearly 9 feet tall and radiated an aura of barely controlled violence. War Commander Thakvan examined each member of the diplomatic team with undisguised contempt. His species had conquered dozens of worlds, and he had never encountered a race that impressed him with their warrior spirit. These humans looked particularly soft and weak. "Which of you speaks for your species?" Thakvan demanded, his voice a rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the deck plates. Commander Torres stepped forward. "I am Commander Torres, leader of this diplomatic mission. We come in peace, seeking mutual understanding between our peoples." Thakvan's 4 eyes focused on Torres with the intensity of a predator examining prey. "Peace," he repeated as if the word tasted foul. "Your kind speaks much of peace. The Cathari have learned that those who speak most of peace are often those least capable of war." Elena remained motionless during this exchange, but her eyes never stopped moving. She noted the positions of each Cathari warrior, the weapons they carried, the way they held themselves. Professional habits died hard, and Elena had spent years learning to read combat situations. "Perhaps," Thakvan continued, circling the human delegation like a predator, "we should test the courage of these peaceful diplomats. In our culture, words mean nothing without the strength to back them." Who among you would face a trial of combat to prove your worth? The human team exchanged nervous glances. This was not part of the planned protocol. Torres opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Elena stepped forward. "I will," she said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. Thakavan turned his massive head to study this small human female who had dared to volunteer. The other humans stared at Elena in shock. She stood barely 5.5 feet tall and couldn't weigh more than 130 pounds. Against a Cathari warrior, she would be crushed in seconds. "You?" Thakavan's laughter was like grinding stone. "You are smaller than our children. Do you seek death, little one?" Elena met his four-eyed gaze without flinching. "I seek to represent my people with honor." Something in her voice, some quality of absolute certainty, caused Thakvan's laughter to fade. He had heard that tone before in the voices of warriors who had faced death and emerged victorious. It was the sound of someone who had nothing left to prove to anyone, including themselves. "Very well," he said slowly. "Tomorrow you will face one of our junior warriors in single combat. When you fall, your people will know the price of weakness." Elena nodded once. "Understood." As the Cathari boarding party departed, the human team erupted in frantic whispers. Commander Torres grabbed Elena's arm. "Are you insane?" he hissed. "Do you have any idea what you just volunteered for?" Elena looked at him with those calm, dark eyes. "Yes," she said quietly. "I volunteered to save all of our lives." The Cathari arena ship, Blood's Honor, dwarfed the human transport as both vessels moved into orbit around the Empire's capital world. Elena stood at the observation deck, watching the massive vessel grow larger as they approached the docking bay. The arena ship was a testament to Cathari culture, a mobile coliseum where warriors proved their worth before audiences of thousands. Dr. Sarah Chen, the mission's cultural specialist, approached Elena with obvious distress. "I've been studying their combat records all night," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Elena, their junior warriors have killed experienced soldiers from a dozen different species. Some of those species were physically superior to humans." Elena continued watching the alien vessel. "What did you learn about their fighting style?" "They rely on overwhelming physical force and their four-armed advantage," Chen explained. "Their junior warriors are still 7 feet tall and incredibly strong. They use weapons that would require 2 humans to lift." "Weaknesses?" Elena asked quietly. Chen hesitated. "Their armor has joint vulnerabilities, but you'd need incredible precision to exploit them. And Elena, they're not just fighting to win. In their culture, showing mercy to a defeated opponent is considered an insult. If you go down, they won't stop until you're dead." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for the information." The docking procedure took several hours, during which Elena disappeared into her quarters. When she emerged, she had changed into simple black clothing and carried only a single combat knife, standard issue for diplomatic security personnel. The other humans stared at her minimal equipment with growing alarm. "That's it?" Commander Torres asked. "One knife against a 7-foot alien warrior?" "It's what I'm comfortable with," Elena replied. War Commander Thakvan met them at the airlock, accompanied by a dozen of his officers. His expression showed satisfaction at seeing the small human woman, who would soon provide entertainment for his troops. "The arena awaits," he announced. "Our warrior Sektar has prepared for this honor. He has studied recordings of human combat techniques and found them amusing." The walk through the arena ship revealed the true scope of Cathari military might. Corridors wide enough for 10 humans to walk abreast were considered narrow by their standards. The walls displayed weapons from conquered civilizations, trophies taken from species that had failed to prove their worth. Elena absorbed every detail as they walked. The gravity was 30% heavier than Earth standard, which would affect her movement and endurance. The air had a metallic taste that suggested different atmospheric composition. The lighting was harsher, designed for Cathari vision. Every factor would matter in the coming fight. The arena itself was a massive circular chamber with seating for 5,000 spectators. Cathari warriors filled every available space, their excited chittering echoing off the metal walls. At the center of the arena was a simple dirt floor surrounded by energy barriers, a killing ground where honor was won and lost. Sektar stood waiting in the arena center, and Elena had to suppress a moment of surprise at his size. Even for a junior warrior, he was impressive. 7.5 feet tall with gleaming black armor covering most of his chitinous hide. He carried 2 curved swords that gleamed under the arena lights. His forearms moved in perfect coordination as he practiced combat forms, each movement flowing into the next with deadly grace. "Your champion awaits," Thakvan said to Elena. "Do you wish to reconsider?" There is no shame in acknowledging superior strength. Elena studied Sektar for a long moment. She watched how he moved, how he held his weapons, where his attention focused. "No," she said finally. "I'm ready." The crowd's chittering grew louder as Elena entered the arena. To them she looked like a child who had wandered into a predator's den. Even Sektar seemed confused by her calm demeanor as she walked to the center of the combat zone. War Commander Thakvan's voice boomed through the arena speakers. "Warriors of the Empire! Today we witness the testing of the species called humans. Their representative will face Sektar in single combat to determine if their kind possesses the strength to treat with the Kethari as equals." Elena drew her combat knife and settled into a relaxed stance. The blade was only 6 inches long, a toy compared to Sektar's massive swords. The crowd's amusement was palpable. "If their champion falls," Thakvan continued, "we will know that humans are meant for servitude, not partnership." Sektar raised his forearms, swords glinting. "Human," he called out in accented standard, "you show courage by facing me. I will make your death swift as a mark of respect." Elena said nothing. She rarely wasted words, especially before a fight. Instead, she watched Sektar's stance, the way he distributed his weight, how his multiple arms created both advantages and complications in his guard. The signal to begin came as a sharp tone that cut through the arena noise. Sektar immediately charged forward, both swords sweeping in complex patterns designed to overwhelm and confuse his opponent. His four-armed assault was a whirlwind of steel that had defeated dozens of enemies. Elena simply wasn't there when the blades arrived. She had moved with liquid grace, sliding to Sektar's left side, where his weapon configuration created a momentary blind spot. Her knife flicked out, finding the joint between armor plates at his hip. It was a precise cut, not deep enough to cause serious damage, but enough to draw first blood. The crowd fell silent. Sektar spun with surprising speed, bringing his secondary arms around in a crushing blow that should have ended the fight. Elena ducked under the strike and rolled between his legs, her blade leaving another shallow cut on his ankle joint as she passed. Sektar roared in frustration and pain. No opponent had ever lasted this long against his opening assault, much less drawn blood twice. He began a more careful stalking pattern, using his reach advantage to keep Elena at distance. But Elena had spent years learning to fight larger, stronger opponents. She understood that direct confrontation was suicide against superior force. Instead, she began to work. She moved like water around Sektar's attacks, never where he expected, always finding the gaps in his defenses that his size and multiple weapons created. Each time she passed his guard, her knife found another joint, another weak point in his armor. The cuts were small, precise, and adding up. Sektar's movements became more desperate as frustration mounted. This tiny human was making him look foolish in front of 5,000 warriors. He abandoned technique for brute force, swinging his swords in wide arcs meant to catch Elena no matter where she moved. It was exactly what Elena had been waiting for. As Sektar overextended in a massive overhead strike, Elena stepped inside his reach. Her knife moved 3 times in rapid succession, once across the back of each knee, and once across the nerve cluster at the base of his neck that she had identified from Dr. Chen's anatomical data. Sektar collapsed like a falling tree. He wasn't dead, but his legs no longer responded to his commands and his grip on his weapons had loosened beyond recovery. Elena stood over him, her knife at his throat, breathing heavily but uninjured. The arena had gone completely silent. 5,000 Kethari warriors stared in stunned disbelief at the impossible scene before them. The silence in the arena stretched for what felt like an eternity. Elena stood over the fallen Sektar, her knife steady at his throat, waiting. In Kethari culture, she knew the defeated warrior's fate rested with the victor. She could kill him and claim total victory, or she could show mercy and risk being seen as weak. Sektar's 4 eyes looked up at her with a mixture of pain, confusion, and something that might have been respect. "You fought with honor, small warrior," he whispered in broken standard. "I am defeated. Grant me a clean death." Elena met his gaze for a long moment. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, she stepped back and sheathed her knife. "You fought bravely," she said, her quiet voice somehow carrying to every corner of the silent arena. There is no honor in killing a worthy opponent who cannot defend himself. The explosion of sound from the Kithari crowd was deafening. Some warriors roared approval, others chittered in confusion, and still others seemed outraged by her decision. Elena stood calmly in the center of the chaos, helping Sektar to a sitting position despite his paralyzed legs. War Commander Thakvan's voice cut through the noise. Silence. The arena fell quiet again. Human warrior, you have achieved victory in combat, but you show mercy to your defeated foe. Explain this choice. Elena looked up at the command box where Thakvan stood. In my culture, we believe that true strength is shown not just in the ability to kill, but in the wisdom to know when killing is unnecessary. Sektar fought with courage and skill. His defeat was honorable. Why would I destroy someone who could become an ally? A new voice spoke from the crowd, an ancient Kithari whose armor bore the marks of countless battles. I am Elder Keshmak, he announced. I have seen 10,000 combats in this arena. Never have I witnessed such precision, such control, such understanding of what true victory means. Thakvan's expression was unreadable as he processed this unprecedented situation. The human had defeated one of their junior warriors through skill rather than luck, and then shown mercy from a position of strength. It challenged everything he thought he knew about human nature. The combat laws are clear, Thakvan announced finally. The human has proven her worth and the worth of her species. The diplomatic talks will proceed as scheduled. But as Elena was escorted from the arena, she noticed something troubling. Not all of the Kithari warriors seemed pleased with the outcome. A group of them near the exit chittered angrily among themselves, their posture suggesting they disagreed with the official decision. Dr. Chen met Elena at the arena exit, medical scanner in hand. Are you injured? I can't believe what I just witnessed. I'm fine, Elena said, though she accepted a water container gratefully. The fight had been more exhausting than she let show. What's the status on Sektar? Their medics say the nerve paralysis will wear off in a few hours. You could have killed him easily, couldn't you? Elena nodded. The throat cut would have been simple, but dead enemies can't become friends. Over the next 3 days, the diplomatic talks proceeded better than anyone had dared hope. Elena's victory had earned the humans a level of respect that opened doors previously thought impossible. Trade agreements were discussed, cultural exchange programs were planned, and mutual defense pacts were seriously considered. But Elena remained watchful. She had noticed the same group of dissatisfied warriors appearing at various points around the diplomatic compound. Their leader was a scarred veteran named Graktul, whose missing left arm testified to his combat experience. Each time she saw them, their body language suggested they were planning something. On the 4th evening, her suspicions proved correct. Elena was walking the perimeter of the human quarters when she detected movement in the shadows between buildings. Her training took over instantly. She pressed herself against a wall and listened carefully. Multiple footsteps. Heavy breathing. The metallic whisper of weapons being readied. Graktul's voice drifted through the darkness. The war commander may accept these weak humans, but I do not. Tonight we prove that their victory was luck. We kill their warriors and show the Empire what humans truly are. Elena counted at least 6 different voices responding with agreement. A surprise attack on the human diplomatic quarters would be devastating. Most of the team were negotiators and scientists, not combat personnel. If Graktul's group struck without warning, it would be a massacre. She could have retreated to raise the alarm, but by the time help arrived, the attack would be over. Elena made the decision that defined her entire approach to life. When action was needed, take it immediately and completely. Moving through the shadows with practiced silence, Elena began to hunt. The first Kithari warrior never knew what hit him. Elena's knife found the nerve cluster at the base of his skull, dropping him unconscious without a sound. She lowered his body carefully to avoid any noise that might alert the others. The second warrior was more alert, turning just as Elena approached. She threw her knife with deadly accuracy, striking him in the shoulder and severing the major nerve bundle that controlled his dominant arm. As he opened his mouth to cry out, Elena was already there, applying a chokehold that cut off his air supply. He fell unconscious within seconds, but the third warrior spotted her movement and shouted a warning. Intruder! The human warrior is here. The element of surprise was gone. Elena retrieved her knife and assessed the situation quickly. 4 remaining Kithari warriors, including Graktul, were now alert and armed. They spread out to surround her, learning from Sektar's mistake of allowing her to control the engagement range. So, Graktul snarled, the arena champion thinks she can face real warriors in real combat. You had luck against a soft junior warrior. Now face those who have killed for decades. Elena said nothing, but her stance shifted subtly. In the arena, she had been fighting to prove a point. Now she was fighting to protect her people. The difference was significant. Graktul attacked first, his 3 remaining arms wielding weapons with the skill of a lifetime warrior. But Elena had learned something important during her fight with Sektul. Cathari warriors, despite their skill, were accustomed to overwhelming opponents through superior strength and reach. They expected enemies to retreat or break under pressure. Elena did neither. She flowed forward into Graktul's attack, using his own momentum against him. Her knife found the joint where his armor connected at the elbow, severing the tendons that controlled his weapon grip. His primary sword clattered to the ground as Elena spun away from his retaliatory strikes. The other 3 warriors attacked simultaneously, trying to use their numbers advantage. Elena used the narrow space between buildings to limit their ability to surround her, forcing them to attack in sequence rather than all at once. What followed was not a battle. It was a demonstration of what human ingenuity and determination could accomplish against superior physical force. Elena moved through her opponents like a force of nature, every movement precise, every strike targeted at maximum effect with minimal effort. When the fight was over, all 6 attackers lay unconscious or disabled. Elena stood among them, breathing hard but uninjured. She had protected her people without killing any of her opponents, even those who had intended murder. War Commander Thakvan arrived with security forces just as Elena was checking to ensure all the attackers were still alive. He surveyed the scene with growing amazement. 6 of my warriors, he said slowly. Veterans all. And you defeated them alone? Elena cleaned her knife carefully before sheathing it. They chose to threaten my people, she said simply. I chose to stop them. Word of Elena's single-handed victory over 6 veteran Cathari warriors spread through the Empire's capital like wildfire. What had begun as a simple diplomatic mission was rapidly becoming something unprecedented in Cathari history. A legend about a small human female who fought like a force of nature. The injured warriors, once recovered, told and retold the story of their defeat with a mixture of shame and awe. Graktul, despite his wounded pride, admitted to anyone who would listen that he had never faced such precise, controlled violence. She moved like death itself, he would say, but chose mercy where death would have been easier. Emperor Zethkul, supreme ruler of the Cathari Empire, summoned the human delegation to his throne room. The massive chamber could have housed a small city, its walls decorated with the weapons and armor of conquered civilizations. At its center sat the emperor on a throne, carved from the hull of the first ship the Cathari had captured in battle. Zethkul stood nearly 10 feet tall, his ancient armor bearing the scars of countless battles. His 4 eyes regarded the humans with the calculating intelligence of a predator who had survived by being smarter and more ruthless than all his enemies. Humans, his voice boomed across the throne room, your warrior has done something remarkable. In 3 centuries of conquest, no species has ever shown such skill combined with such restraint. Tell me, small warrior, how does one so small defeat so many who are so much larger? Elena stepped forward, her bearing respectful but unafraid. Your Majesty, size and strength are only advantages if they can be applied effectively.
Speed, precision, and understanding of anatomy can overcome raw power when used correctly. And the mercy you showed?
Both to Sektar and to the assassins? This is not weakness. In human culture, Your Majesty, we believe that the strongest person is one who has the power to destroy but chooses to build instead. Killing is easy. Creating something better requires real strength. The Emperor studied her for a long moment. You speak as though you have killed before. Elena met his gaze steadily. I have served in conflicts where killing was necessary to protect innocent lives. I take no pleasure in it, but I do not hesitate when there is no alternative. Yet you chose alternatives in both your fights here. Because alternatives existed, Your Majesty. Dead enemies cannot become allies. Dead warriors cannot learn better ways. Emperor Zethkul's expression was unreadable as he processed this philosophy. The Cathari Empire had been built on the principle that might made right, that the strong naturally ruled the weak. Here was a creature who was physically weak by Cathari standards, yet had proven herself stronger than their warriors through skill and intellect. War Commander Thakvon, the Emperor said suddenly, your assessment of these humans has changed, has it not? Thakvon stepped forward, his massive frame somehow diminished in the presence of his ruler. Yes, Your Majesty. I believed humans were weak because they spoke of peace. I now understand that they speak of peace because they are strong enough to choose it. The Emperor nodded slowly. And what do you recommend regarding our relationship with their species? Full alliance, Your Majesty. These humans possess something we have never encountered, the ability to win through means other than pure destruction. Such allies could make our empire stronger in ways we have never imagined. Before the Emperor could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the throne room. A communications officer rushed forward, his forearms working frantically over a portable command console. Your Majesty, the officer reported, we are receiving distress signals from the mining colonies in the Zarian system. They report massive ships of unknown configuration attacking the installations. The Emperor's four eyes narrowed dangerously. The Zarian system was 3 days' journey from the capital and contained some of the Empire's most valuable resource extraction operations. More importantly, it was defended by a full battle fleet. Show me, Zethkol commanded. A holographic display materialized in the center of the throne room, showing grainy images transmitted from the mining colonies before they went dark. The attacking ships were unlike anything in Cathari records. Sleek, organic-looking vessels that seemed to shift and flow like living creatures. The Devourers, breathed War Commander Thakvon, his voice filled with a fear Elena had never heard from a Cathari before. Who are the Devourers? Commander Torres asked. The Emperor's expression had grown grim. A species from beyond our borders. They consume entire worlds, stripping them of all biological matter to fuel their expansion. We have fought them before 50 years ago. They nearly destroyed us then. Nearly, Elena asked quietly. We held them back through sacrifice of 17 worlds and half our fleet. The survivors retreated beyond our sensor range. We hoped they had found other prey to occupy them. The communications officer looked up from his console. Your Majesty, Admiral Kexthan reports the Zerion battle fleet has gone silent. Last transmission indicated they were heavily outnumbered and suffering severe casualties. Elena stepped forward. Your Majesty, humanity has experienced fighting threats that seem overwhelming. Perhaps we could assist. War Commander Thakvon turned to stare at her. Human, you do not understand. The Devourers travel in fleets of thousands of ships. Their technology adapts to whatever weapons we use against them. This is not a battle where your fighting skills can make a difference. Maybe not my fighting skills alone, Elena agreed, but human military doctrine emphasizes adaptability, unconventional tactics, and coordinated fleet actions. We've learned to win against superior forces through better strategy rather than superior strength. Emperor Zethkol studied the tactical displays showing the scope of the Devourer advance. What do you propose? Elena looked at Commander Torres, who nodded his permission to continue. Humanity has a saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Devourers threaten both our species. Let us combine Cathari strength with human tactical innovation. Together we might accomplish what neither could do alone. The throne room fell silent as the Emperor considered this proposal. Alliance was one thing. Asking humans to fight alongside them against the Empire's greatest threat was something entirely different. You would risk your ships and crews for a species you barely know? The Emperor asked. Elena's voice was steady and certain. Your Majesty, predators like the Devourers don't stop with one prey species. If they consume your empire, they'll come for humanity next. Better to stop them here together than face them alone later. The Emperor stood from his throne, his 10-foot frame imposing even at a distance. War Commander Thakvon, prepare the fleet for immediate departure. Send word to all systems. We mobilize for total war against the Devourers. He turned to Elena. Human warrior, you and your people will accompany us. If your tactical knowledge is as impressive as your fighting skills, perhaps there is hope after all. Elena bowed respectfully. We won't let you down, Your Majesty. As the throne room erupted into organized chaos with preparations for war, Elena stood quietly among the rushing Cathari officers. She had volunteered humanity for a war against an enemy she knew nothing about, facing odds that had nearly destroyed an empire of warriors. But she had seen something in the Emperor's eyes when he spoke of the Devourers. Not just fear, but the recognition that traditional Cathari methods had failed before. Sometimes the greatest bravery was admitting you needed help. Now she would have to prove that human ingenuity could succeed where Cathari strength had fallen short. The real test was just beginning. The combined human Cathari fleet assembled in the Cavo system was the largest military force in the Empire's history. 300 Cathari warships, each the size of a human city, formed the backbone of the armada. Alongside them, the human contribution seemed almost insignificant. 12 ships led by the heavy cruiser Defiant Dawn. Elena stood on the bridge of the Defiant Dawn beside Admiral Sarah Reynolds, studying tactical displays that showed the scope of their challenge. The Devourers had consumed 2 more systems since Xerion, and their fleet strength was estimated at over 2,000 vessels. I've reviewed the Cathari battle records from their last war with the Devourers, Admiral Reynolds said quietly. Elena, what they're describing, it's unlike anything we've ever faced. The Devourer ships seem to evolve during battle, adapting to whatever tactics are used against them. Elena nodded. Her attention focused on the enemy ship configurations displayed on screen. That's both their strength and their weakness, Admiral. Adaptation takes time, even for them. If we can change our tactics faster than they can adapt, we might have an advantage. War Commander Thakvan materialized on the bridge via holographic projection from his flagship. Human Admiral, our scouts report the Devourer fleet has begun moving toward the Nexus system. If they take Nexus, they will have access to the hyperspace junction that connects all our major worlds. Admiral Reynolds studied the star charts. How long until they reach Nexus? 18 hours at their current speed, Thakvan replied. Our fleet can intercept them in 16 hours if we depart immediately. Elena stepped forward. War Commander, I need to understand exactly how the Devourers adapt. What happened in your previous battles? Thakvan's expression grew dark with old memories. At first, our plasma cannons were effective. Then their ships developed energy shielding that absorbed plasma completely. We switched to kinetic projectiles. They grew armor that deflected them. We tried boarding actions. They learned to counter our fighting techniques within hours. What about their weaknesses? Elena pressed. No species is perfect. There must be something they can't adapt to. They require biological matter to fuel their adaptation process, Thakvan said, but they harvest that from the planets they consume. In battle, we never had the opportunity to starve them. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Admiral, I need to speak with our engineering teams. I have an idea, but I need to know if it's technically feasible. 3 hours later, Elena stood before a joint human Cathari command meeting in the Defiant Dawn's main conference room. The space was crowded with officers from both species, all wearing expressions of grim determination. The Devourers adapt by consuming biological matter and converting it into new technologies, Elena began. But what if we gave them something to consume that would poison their adaptation process instead of fueling it? Admiral Reynolds leaned forward. What are you thinking? Our medical supplies include various synthetic compounds designed to mimic biological molecules. Some of them are toxic to carbon-based life forms. If we could deliver these compounds directly into Devourer ships during the battle, Chief Engineer Martinez interrupted. Elena, you're talking about weaponizing our medical supplies. Even if we could do it, how would we deliver the compounds? Their ships' hulls are supposedly impervious to standard weapons. Elena turned to Thakvan. War Commander, you mentioned boarding actions in your previous war. Did any of your warriors ever successfully penetrate a Devourer ship? A few, Thakvan admitted reluctantly. None returned, but some managed to transmit data before they died. The interior of Devourer ships is a living organism. Walls, floors, even the air circulation systems are biological. Then we don't need to penetrate their hulls, Elena said. We need to get inside and poison them from within. The room erupted in discussion as officers from both species debated the feasibility of Elena's plan. Commander Torres raised his voice above the noise. Elena, what you're describing is essentially a suicide mission. How do we get people inside their ships? Elena was quiet for a moment before answering. The same way the Cathari did it before, boarding pods. But instead of trying to fight our way through the ship, we focus on deploying the toxins and getting out. War Commander Thakvan studied the tactical implications. It could work, but it would require perfect coordination. The boarding teams would have only minutes before the ships adapt to the toxins and purge them. Admiral Reynolds looked at Elena with concern. Who would lead these boarding teams? We're talking about missions with almost zero survival probability. Elena met her gaze steadily. I will. The conference room fell silent. Admiral Reynolds stared at Elena in disbelief. Absolutely not. You're too valuable to risk on what amounts to a kamikaze mission. Admiral, this plan only works if the team leader understands both the tactical requirements and how to move through hostile territory without being detected. I have the necessary experience. Thakvan's 4 eyes focused on Elena with something approaching admiration. Human warrior, you continue to demonstrate the courage that won you honor in our arena. But this is different. You would be fighting an enemy that learns from every encounter, which is exactly why speed and precision are crucial, Elena replied. The longer we take, the more they learn. Fast insertion, deploy the toxins, fast extraction. No prolonged fighting, no complicated maneuvers. Admiral Reynolds was clearly struggling with the decision. Elena, if this goes wrong, we lose the war, Elena said simply. The Devourers have already proven they can defeat conventional tactics. We need to try something they've never seen before. Chief Engineer Martinez cleared his throat. I've been running calculations while you talked. We can synthesize enough toxin compounds for maybe 6 boarding actions. After that, we'll be out of raw materials. Elena nodded. Then we make those 6 actions count. War Commander, I'll need 6 of your best warriors willing to undertake high-risk missions. You shall have them, Thakvan said without hesitation, but I insist on leading one of the teams myself. Admiral Reynolds looked around the room at the faces of officers who had just volunteered for what was essentially certain death. All right, she said finally. We'll try it. But Elena, you come back from this. That's an order. Elena actually smiled, a rare expression that transformed her usually serious features. I'll do my best, Admiral. As the meeting broke up and officers rushed to prepare for the desperate gamble ahead, Elena remained in the conference room with Admiral Reynolds. Sarah, Elena said quietly, using the Admiral's first name for the first time in years. If something happens to me out there, make sure the Kithari know that humanity doesn't abandon its allies. Admiral Reynolds gripped Elena's shoulder. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're too stubborn to die. Elena's smile returned briefly. I certainly hope so. 14 hours later, the combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus system. Ahead of them, a massive cloud of Devourer ships moved through space like a living plague, their organic hulls pulsing with alien life. Elena stood in the launch bay of the Defiant Dawn, checking her equipment one final time. Her boarding pod was loaded with enough synthetic toxins to poison the biological systems of an entire Devourer vessel. Around her, 5 Kithari warriors performed their own final preparations, their forearmed efficiency impressive even under these circumstances. War Commander Thakvan approached her, his armor gleaming under the bay lights. Human warrior, it has been an honor to serve alongside you. May your ancestors guide your blade. Elena clasped his massive hand with both of hers. May we both live to drink victory wine together, War Commander. The battle alarms began to sound throughout the ship. In minutes, they would launch into the greatest test of human ingenuity and Kithari courage the galaxy had ever seen. Elena climbed into her boarding pod, her heart steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. She had spoken little during the planning sessions, but her actions were about to shout her bravery to the stars themselves. The battle for the Nexus system began with a thunderous exchange of fire that lit up space like an artificial star. Kithari plasma cannons lanced through the darkness, while Devourer ships responded with weapons that seemed to bend reality itself around their targets. Elena watched through her boarding pod sensors as the massive fleets collided in the largest space battle in galactic history. All boarding teams. This is Admiral Reynolds, came the voice through Elena's communicator. The main fleet is engaging to draw their attention. You have a narrow window before they adapt to our tactics. Launch when ready. Elena's pod shot from the Defiant Dawn's launch bay like a bullet, followed by 5 identical pods carrying the Kithari volunteers. Their target was a massive Devourer vessel near the center of the enemy formation, a ship the size of a small moon whose organic hull pulsed with veins of sickly green light. The approach was a nightmare of dodging energy beams and organic projectiles that seemed to actively hunt their small pods. Elena's piloting skills, honed through years of dangerous missions, kept her craft dancing between the attacks while she guided her team toward their insertion point. "Contact in 30 seconds, she reported over the team channel. "Remember, we're not here to fight our way through the ship. Deploy the toxins and get out. Speed is everything." War Commander Thakvan's voice crackled through the static. "Acknowledged, human warrior. My warriors are ready." Elena's pod struck the Devourer ship's hull with enough force to penetrate the outer membrane. The biological material seemed to close around the pod like a healing wound, sealing her inside the ship's living corridors. She emerged from the pod into an environment that defied every expectation of what a spacecraft interior should look like. The walls pulsed with a heartbeat rhythm, and bioluminescent veins provided dim, shifting light. The air was thick and humid, filled with organic scents that made her nose burn. Worst of all, she could feel the ship around her, not just see it, but actually sense its presence like a malevolent consciousness examining her. Elena activated her toxin dispersal system, a backpack device that would spray synthetic compounds into the ship's biological systems. The plan was to move toward the central nervous cluster that Cathari intelligence suggested would be near the ship's core. She began moving through the organic corridors with practiced stealth, her feet silent on the spongy floor material. Behind her, the toxin dispersal system left a trail of chemicals that were immediately absorbed by the ship's biological matrix. The first sign that their plan was working came 5 minutes into the mission. The walls around Elena began to shudder and change color, shifting from their normal green to an unhealthy yellow. The ship's heartbeat rhythm became irregular, stuttering like a damaged engine. "Team leader to all units," Elena whispered into her communicator. "Primary toxins are having effect. Continue toward your targets." But the Devourers were already beginning to adapt. Elena felt the ship's attention focus on her location like a searchlight finding its target. The corridors ahead of her began to shift and change, walls flowing like water to block her path forward. Elena switched to her backup route, but that too was closing off. The ship was learning her movement patterns and trying to trap her. She began to understand how previous boarding parties had been captured. The ships themselves were intelligent enough to hunt intruders. Fighting through rising panic, Elena remembered her training. When the environment turned hostile, change the rules of engagement. Instead of trying to outrun the ship's adaptive responses, she began moving in random patterns, doubling back on herself, taking routes that made no tactical sense. The ship's responses became confused, trying to predict movements that had no pattern to predict. Elena used this confusion to reach a major arterial passage that led toward the ship's core. She could see the central nervous cluster ahead, a massive organic brain that pulsed with electrical activity. As she approached the brain, Elena encountered the ship's final defense, creatures that seemed to be part of the ship itself, flowing out of the walls like antibodies responding to an infection. They were unlike anything in the human or Cathari databases, shape-shifting beings that could adapt their form to counter whatever threat they faced. Elena's first instinct was to fight, but she forced herself to think strategically. Fighting these creatures would waste time and reveal her capabilities, allowing them to adapt. Instead, she used her remaining explosive charges to blow a hole in the arterial wall, creating a shortcut that bypassed the defenders entirely. The central nervous cluster was even more massive than the intelligence reports had suggested. Elena found herself standing before a brain the size of a building, its surface crawling with electrical discharges that suggested massive processing power. This was the intelligence controlling the entire ship. Elena connected her toxin dispersal system directly to the brain's major nerve channels and activated the maximum discharge. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The entire ship convulsed like a living creature in pain, throwing Elena to the floor as gravitational fields fluctuated wildly. The brain's electrical activity became chaotic, random discharges firing in all directions. More importantly, Elena could feel the ship's hostile attention fade as its central intelligence became too damaged to coordinate its defenses. "Team leader to all units," she reported, struggling to maintain her footing as the ship continued to convulse. "Primary target neutralized. Begin extraction immediately." Elena fought her way back through corridors that were now shifting randomly rather than trying to trap her. The ship's death throes were making navigation nearly impossible, but she reached her boarding pod just as structural failures began tearing through the vessel's hull. As her pod launched from the dying Devourer ship, Elena watched through her sensors as the massive vessel began to break apart. The toxins had spread throughout its biological matrix, poisoning the living systems that held it together. Within minutes, the moon-sized ship was nothing but floating debris. Elena, Admiral Reynolds' voice crackled through the communicator. Status report. Primary target destroyed, Elena replied, checking her scanner for the other boarding teams. 4 additional targets confirmed destroyed. War Commander Thakvan's team status unknown. As if summoned by her words, Thakvan's voice came through the static. This is War Commander Thakvan. Target destroyed, but my pod is damaged. Requesting emergency pickup. Elena immediately changed course toward Thakvan's position, arriving just as his pod's life support systems began to fail. She used her pod's emergency docking system to create a seal between their vessels, allowing the massive Cathari warrior to transfer to her craft. Human warrior, Thakvan said as Elena's pod raced back toward the fleet. Your tactics have achieved something remarkable. Look. Elena followed his gaze to the main battle. The Devourer fleet, which had seemed unstoppable minutes before, was beginning to falter. The destruction of 6 of their largest ships had disrupted their coordination, and their adaptive capabilities seemed to be failing. More importantly, the toxins were spreading from ship to ship through whatever biological connections linked the Devourer vessels. What had been a coordinated fleet intelligence was becoming a chaotic collection of damaged, confused ships. Admiral Reynolds to all ships, came the voice over the fleet communication channel. Press the attack! Their coordination is breaking down. This is our chance. The combined human Cathari fleet surged forward, their weapons finding targets that were no longer adapting fast enough to counter the attacks. Ship after ship of the Devourer fleet began to fall, their biological hulls succumbing to damage they could no longer heal. Elena watched the battle turn from her rescue pod, finally allowing herself to believe they might actually win. Her quiet plan, born from careful observation and desperate innovation, was succeeding beyond her wildest hopes, but she knew the war was far from over. This was just one battle against an enemy that had consumed entire star systems. The real test would come when the Devourers learned from this defeat and adapted their tactics accordingly. For now, though, it was enough that humanity and the Cathari Empire had proven they could stand together against the darkness between the stars. 3 months after the Battle of Nexus, Elena stood in the same Cathari throne room where she had first met Emperor Zethkol. But everything had changed. The walls that once displayed weapons of conquered peoples now held artifacts representing the dozens of species that had joined the human Cathari alliance. What had begun as a desperate alliance against the Devourers had grown into something far greater. The Emperor himself seemed different as well. The calculating predator she had first encountered had been replaced by a leader who understood that true strength came from cooperation rather than domination. Warrior Elena, the Emperor said, his voice carrying warmth that would have been impossible months before. The final reports from our intelligence networks confirm what we hoped. The Devourer incursion has been completely repelled. Their remaining forces have retreated beyond our sensor range, and our allies in neighboring systems report no further attacks. Elena nodded respectfully. The toxin strategy proved more effective than we anticipated, Your Majesty. The biological connections between their ships made them vulnerable to cascading system failures. Your strategy, Admiral Reynolds corrected from her position beside Elena. Elena, you've been characteristically modest about your role in saving both our civilizations. War Commander Thakvan, now bearing the title of Alliance Supreme Commander, stepped forward. The human warrior speaks little of her achievements, as is her way. But the Alliance Council has voted unanimously on a matter of recognition. Elena felt a moment of unease. Large ceremonies and public recognition had never been comfortable for her. She preferred to let her actions speak for themselves rather than receiving awards for doing what needed to be done. Emperor Zethkol rose from his throne, holding an object Elena had never seen before. It appeared to be a crystalline blade, but as it moved, it seemed to shift between different states of matter, sometimes solid, sometimes energy, sometimes something in between. This is the Blade of Unity, the Emperor explained, forged from materials provided by every species in our alliance, blessed by the spiritual leaders of 17 different cultures, and imbued with technologies that represent the best each civilization can offer. Elena stared at the artifact with growing concern. Your Majesty, I'm honored, but there is no rank in any of our militaries equivalent to what you have achieved, the Emperor continued. You are no longer simply a diplomat or a warrior. You have become something new, a bridge builder, one who creates connections between species that were once impossible. Admiral Reynolds smiled at Elena's obvious discomfort. Elena, you can't argue your way out of this one. Every government in the Alliance insisted on this recognition. Elena accepted the blade with hands that remained perfectly steady, despite her emotional turmoil. The weapon felt warm to the touch, and she could sense the various technologies integrated into its structure. It was both a symbol and a functional tool, appropriate for someone who valued substance over ceremony. I am honored by this recognition, Elena said quietly, but I want everyone to understand that what we accomplished was only possible because people from different worlds chose to trust each other. My actions were just one part of a much larger effort. Sektar, the junior warrior Elena had defeated in her first arena combat, stepped forward from among the assembled officers. His legs had fully healed, and he now served as Elena's aide in Alliance operations. Commander Elena, he said, using the title that had emerged naturally during the campaign, you continue to teach us that true victory comes not from defeating enemies, but from turning them into allies. Elena looked around the throne room at the faces representing dozens of different species. Humans stood alongside Cathari warriors. Crystalline beings from the Zeta Reticuli system shared space with gas giant dwellers whose environmental suits allowed them to exist in oxygen atmospheres. The diversity was staggering, and yet they all worked together with a unity that would have seemed impossible just months before. The real victory, Elena said, is not that we stopped the Devourers. It's that we proved different species can achieve more together than any of us could accomplish alone. Dr. Chen approached with a datapad containing the latest intelligence reports. Elena, there's something you should know. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected signals from beyond the galactic rim. It appears there are other species out there fighting similar battles against threats like the Devourers. Elena studied the data with growing interest. How many signals? Dozens, possibly hundreds. It seems the galaxy is full of civilizations struggling against various forms of existential threats. Elena looked up at Emperor Zethkol. Your Majesty, it seems our alliance's work is just beginning. The Emperor's 4 eyes gleamed with something that might have been anticipation. Are you suggesting we expand our efforts beyond our current borders? I'm suggesting that if small acts of cooperation can build trust between species, perhaps larger acts of cooperation can build peace across the entire galaxy, Elena replied. We have technologies, tactics, and most importantly, experience in creating functional alliances. Other civilizations might benefit from what we've learned. War Commander Thakvon studied the star charts displaying the signal sources. Such an undertaking would require massive resources and incredible coordination. The logistics alone would be staggering. Elena smiled, that rare expression that had become more common as she learned to trust her new allies. War Commander, 3 months ago you thought humans were too weak to survive first contact with your species. Sometimes the impossible is just something no one has tried the right way yet. Admiral Reynolds laughed. Elena, are you seriously proposing that we become galactic peace negotiators? I'm proposing that we become galactic bridge builders, Elena corrected. Not imposing our solutions on others, but offering them alternatives to eternal conflict. The throne room fell silent as everyone processed the magnitude of what Elena was suggesting. Expanding their alliance beyond their local cluster would mean venturing into unknown regions of space, encountering species with completely alien mindsets, and attempting to mediate conflicts they didn't yet understand. Emperor Zethkol broke the silence. Bridge builder Elena, such an endeavor would require someone to lead it who understands both the military and diplomatic aspects of creating alliances. Elena felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. She had never sought leadership roles, preferring to work behind the scenes where her actions could speak for themselves. But she also understood that sometimes accepting responsibility was just another form of bravery. If the Alliance Council believes this is the right path, Elena said carefully, I will serve in whatever capacity is needed. Sektar stepped forward again. Commander, many of us would volunteer to serve under your leadership in such an endeavor. Elena looked around the room at faces that reflected hope, determination, and trust. Months ago, these beings had been strangers from different worlds. Now they were allies who had proven they could face the impossible together. Then let's begin planning, Elena said simply. The galaxy is a big place and there's a lot of work to do. As the assembled representatives began discussing the practical details of galactic bridge building, Elena stepped back slightly from the crowd. Admiral Reynolds noticed her withdrawal and approached quietly. Having second thoughts? Reynolds asked. Elena shook her head. Just thinking about how much has changed. A few months ago, I was a security specialist on a routine diplomatic mission. Now I'm apparently responsible for galactic peace. Elena, you've always been responsible for peace. The scale just got bigger. Elena nodded, gripping the blade of unity more firmly. Then I guess it's time to get to work. Outside the throne room's massive windows, the combined fleets of the Alliance hung in space like a constellation of hope. Ships from dozens of worlds maintained formation together, their crews learning to work as one despite their vast differences. Elena had spoken little during her rise to galactic prominence, preferring to let her actions demonstrate her character. But those actions had shouted her bravery, her wisdom, and her unshakable belief that cooperation was stronger than conflict. Now the real work would begin, carrying that message to the stars themselves, one species at a time, one alliance at a time, until the galaxy itself learned to speak with one voice against the darkness between worlds. Elena smiled again, already planning their first mission to the signals beyond the rim. She had work to do, and the universe was waiting.